Hello ladies and gents, I've come back to do another YouTube presentation. I haven't done one of these for a while because I've got a friend of mine who's taking care of his dear old mum, and because she needs all the help that she can get. And also I have one of my other friends was requesting that I do another YouTube presentation, and I thought I'd take this opportunity to do one. This presentation is more focused on the overview of what I'd like to do for my channel. All the other presentations that I've done up to now have been more Hitler bunker related. Most of them have been Hitler bunker related, and I've had, I think, films and that are reference to World War II, Hitler bunker. I've done a few on Spandau, but this presentation is going to be slightly different because it's going to be more in keeping with an overview of what I'd like to focus on for my YouTube channel. The years I'm going to cover are between 1914 and 1994. 1914 was the year that Germany and Europe went to war, and for Berlin, that pretty much, you could say, was in some kind of turmoil, trauma, crisis from 1914 to, I would say, 1994. So you had the First World War from 1914 to 1918, and then after that you had what was known as the Frey Corps. So there were soldiers that came back from the First World War, and they were very unhappy with the Treaty of Versailles, and how they felt that they were mistreated and misled, and these men were still carrying arms, and they were known as the Frey Corps. And then in the 20s we had the Weimar Era, where they were just literally sort of printing money like there was no tomorrow, and also it was like known as the Roaring Twenties, and you had the cabaret. So a lot of the cabaret, which was a sort of a representation which is very unique to Berlin. So if you've ever seen cabaret with Liza Minnelli in it, you'll get an idea of what it was at that time. In 1933, Hitler came into power. So then they had martial law, because Hitler was pretty much a dictator, and it was authoritarian. So they were under martial law. And of course it was a desperate time for the Jewish population. So those that could see the writing on the wall made haste and got out of the country as soon as they could. But with each passing year, it got harder and harder for the Jews to leave Germany. And we all know what happened to the Jews during the course of the war. So the war started in 1939 to 1945, and Hitler pretty much was having success from, say, 1939 to the winter of 1941, and he was like about, I would say, 13 miles from Moscow, and by then his troops were frozen, hungry and exhausted. And Hitler then, from 1942 onwards to the end of the war, 45, pretty much took on the war by himself. He wanted to be able to run things the way he wanted to run things, and as a result, consequently, he made many mistakes, and it cost Germany pretty much the war, which can only have been a good thing. The end of the war came in 1945, but the war didn't really end for Germany, because you had East Prussia, which was lost. Now East Prussia is a part of a Russian enclave, Lithuania, and part of Poland. So East Prussia doesn't exist anymore, and it was one of the reasons why the Second World War started in the first place. eastern Germany was annexed to Poland. So a lot of the ethnic Germans and Germans that actually lived at that part of Germany had to leave. So it was like a mass migration. It was literally forced from their homes. Excuse me. And they were forced back into Greater Germany. So if you were to look on a map of Germany today, you will see Berlin is very close to the Polish border, whereas before the end of 45, you would have seen it was a lot further to get into Poland. But now, however, Berlin is very close to the Polish border. Then you had the Berlin Airlift of 1948, and this was because they'd closed all the roads and railways to Berlin, and these are known as corridors. And they really had difficulty keeping Berlin afloat, because at that time, if you think about it, Berlin was pretty much isolated, and as a result of this isolation, they had to import foodstuffs from Western Germany, from the UK, from France, wherever they could, and with the help of the Americans, they were able to shuttle enough calories to keep West Berlin up and running and healthy, and have enough coal and electricity and so on and so forth. And this was another form of self-preservation and the ability to stand up to the Soviet threat. And this lasted for about a year, maybe about a year or so. So it's a very important part of German history and European history. And then in 49, Germany was pretty much divided into East and West. And because in West Germany they had the Deutschmark, and in Eastern Germany they had their own currency, and that pretty much divided Germany from then on until the fall of the Berlin Wall. So 1953, in 53 they had the strike. There was a major strike because the East German authorities were forcing the workforce to work harder and produce more for less money. And this is when the workers laid down they decided to walk out of the factories and said, we've had enough of this. And this pretty much could have brought down the East German regime. And Walter Ulbricht, he was the head of East Germany. He was a dictator, that's what he was. Kept going to Moscow, asking Moscow that we need, and suggesting to them, telling them effectively that they need to close the border, because they were hemorrhaging so many people through Berlin. Because Berlin, if anybody sort of takes the time to look at a map of Berlin, especially an old map of Berlin, if you were to go online, you will realise that Berlin is effectively an island in East Germany. So it's almost like from West Germany you have to go either on the motorway or by rail or fly it within a corridor to get to West Berlin. And so Walter Ulbricht closed the border between East Germany and West Germany, but the border was still open in Berlin. So more and more people were leaving East Germany, and certainly the farmers were, because their farms were being confiscated by the state. So they just left their farms go to seed. And eventually Walter Ulbricht was able to negotiate and succeed in closing the border. Now, John F. Kennedy was invited to go to West Berlin, and he gave that famous speech, that Ich bin ein Berliner speech, that he was known for. And he realised the situation and the consequences, because it wasn't just what Walter Ulbricht was wanting, which is to keep the people locked in effectively. What he was wanting was to avoid World War III, and it was the best of a bad option, keeping having the Berlin Wall built as it was at the time, which is in 1961. And then tragically, John F. Kennedy was assassinated in November the 22nd, 1963, and they named the road after him, where he gave that famous Ich bin ein Berliner speech. I believe in 1967 the Shah of Iran was invited to come to Berlin, and there was a famous protest at the time, and it was quite brutal. And tragically, there was one of the protesters was shot and killed by one of the police, and this triggered the Baader-Meinhof gang. The Baader-Meinhof gang came into being as a result of that protest and the shooting of this protester, whose name I can't quite recall at the minute. In 1971, Walter Ulbricht was forced from office, and Erich Honecker came into power, and he was responsible for the Berlin Wall. The reason being is because Moscow couldn't control Walter Ulbricht, because Walter Ulbricht was from the old school. He was a Stalinist. He believed that he shouldn't have to cooperate with West Germany, and Moscow was encouraging East Germany to have détente with West Germany. And because Walter Ulbricht refused to do this, he was forced from office, and Erich Honecker came into being. Now, I believe this was the beginning of the end of East Germany in 1971. Others say it was in the early 80s, in Poland, when they had the strikes at the coal mine by Lech Wałęsa. I've just brutalised his name. Sorry, I can't pronounce it clearly. But and there in Berlin, at the Reichstag, or also known as the Bundestag, you will see a piece of the wall, and this wall was from Poland, and it was donated to the German government, and they say on a plaque that this was the beginning of the end of the Berlin Wall. But I believe it started a lot sooner. I believe it started in 1971 under Erich Honecker's regime, because they were, there were agreements made that they wouldn't actually shoot anyone that would try and climb over the Berlin Wall, and other agreements were made, currency exchanges, visits from relatives from West Germany, West Berlin, going into East Berlin, so on and so forth. Gorbachev came into power in 1983, and this is where the thaw was taking place. The CIA were based in Berlin. They were listening into the communications of the East Germans. They had a special listening post on Teufels Mountain, or Devil's Mountain, and it was said that they could actually listen into Honecker's bedroom. I don't know how true that is, but that's what I've heard. It was at this time that Reagan was actually talking about Star Wars and making, having these satellites that could actually attack from outer space, which the the Soviet Union were very, very nervous about. And then the Soviet Union were somehow coerced to go into Afghanistan, and America were very good at actually recognizing the vulnerability of them invading Afghanistan, and it was having a great strain on the economy of the Soviet Union and its satellites. And this is, I believe, brought down or ended the Soviet era as a result, because of the economic pressures. As a result of these economic pressures, this forced people to come out on the street. Now, I believe that the CIA were involved in stirring up a lot of the unrest in East Germany, simply because when the Berlin Wall, when it did finally fall in 1989, they bought pieces of the Berlin Wall and they shipped it to Virginia. So when you go into the headquarters of the CIA, you have to literally walk around the Berlin Wall before you can get into the building of the CIA, which says a lot. I mean, you don't have to read 10 books to realize what it is that they're doing and what they're representing by that gesture. In 1991, Frederick the Great was reburied at Sanssouci, which was his dying wish, because he wanted to be buried with his whippets. And then in 1994, all the Russian troops and the Allies, the Western Allies, officially left Berlin. So Berlin was pretty much occupied from 1945 to 1994, which is a humongous amount of time to be under occupation. But it was more a token. The West always said it was more a token, just to show the Russians that they are in Berlin, and to let everybody know that they're there. And this kind of ended the era, and the new era was pretty much when, with the European Union as it now stands. Lech Wałęsa actually was invited to Berlin, and they had as symbolism, they had like pieces of the wall, and he was invited to actually push the wall so they would all fall down like dominoes. And the funny thing was, and it is funny, that is when he pushed it, he himself fell over. But they tried to edit it out so that you couldn't quite see that he did. But if you look closely, you can see that he actually fell over. Anyway, that concludes my presentation. This is a promise that I made to my good friend Keith, that I would make this presentation, and that my friend will post this YouTube presentation after I've finished talking. So, auf Wiedersehen.